Good morning. First of all, let me thank you all for coming here in this lovely Sunday morning. My name is İnci Bilgin. I'm a PhD student at Kadir Has University and a researcher at Bandırma University in the Department of International Relations. This talk is designed to collect feedback in the early study of my dissertation. So your comments and critiques are extremely valuable for me. I need to underline that because the field research has not been done yet. There is no result and findings regarding the case study. As you can see on the screen, our topic is gender dynamics of economic and social upgrading and downgrading in the global value chains, the role of embeddedness and governance in Turkey's apparel. The presentation is structured as follows. Introduction, research question, the sub-questions, economic and social upgrading and its gender dynamics, an analytical framework, methodology, and conclusion. The origin of the phrase global value chains go back to the phrase of global commodity chains introduced by Hopkins and Wallerstein in their world systems theory. According to Wallerstein, capitalist world economy created global commodity chains functioning in international division of labor, in which core produce capital and technology intensive high value added commodities, while periphery producing labor intensive and low value added commodities. So researchers focusing on global commodity chains, global supply chains, global value chains, global production networks, all has been inspired by the world systems theory. Now there are two main blocks in the literature, global value chains and global production networks approaches. Each has strengths and weaknesses in particular issues. However, their common point is that gender aspect has been neglected in both for a couple of decades. 2 years ago, Barrientos developed an analytical framework for analysis of gender dynamics in global production networks, which is called global reproduction networks. It was a combination of three literature: global value chains, global production networks, and feminist political economy. With this approach, Barrientos pointed out the blurring distinction between commercial production and social reproduction, with the participation of women in global production as paid labor. In my research, I use her analytical framework to understand the gender dynamics of economic and social upgrading and downgrading in the global value chains of apparel by focusing on production in Turkey. The questions that drives this research are: why do the process of economic and social upgrading and downgrading in global value chains bring inequalities on the basis of gender? And under what conditions are gender equitable outcomes are achieved? And here you can see the possible answers: economic and social embeddedness of global production networks, gender articulations, and global value chain governance matter. The sub-questions of the research are: how can gender equitable economic and social upgrading and downgrading be defined and assessed? Does economic and social upgrading of global production networks shape gender dynamics of economic and social upgrading and downgrading? Can interlayered governance in global value chains bring about more gender equitable outcomes for workers? Well, what's upgrading? There are three types of upgrading in the global value chains literature. This study focuses on two types. On the one hand, economic upgrading simply means moving from lower value-added activities toward higher value-added activities. It can be process upgrading, or product upgrading, functional upgrading, or chain upgrading. On the other hand, social upgrading refers to improvements in the workers' conditions. It can be measurable standards, wages, health and safety, working hours, social protection and type of contract, and enabling rights, which is more harder to measure: freedom of association, the right to collective bargaining, non-discrimination, empowerment, and voice. Economic and social upgrading are not necessarily occur at the same time or follow each other. However, they are complementary to each other in achieving sustainable development. Here you can see the implications for women workers. The upgrading is a road. It can be low road or high road. In the low road, in the GVC entry level, women employed as cheap and disposable labor. But in upgrading, women employed for undervalued skills and low pay, access to basic rights and protection, then women employed for tangible and intangible skills, access to better jobs and opportunities, and finally, potential for greater equality and economic empowerment. This is the core of my thesis. The analytical framework has been constructed on two main pillars to achieve gender equitable upgrading outcomes: the GRPN analysis and global value chain governance analysis. First, with GRPN framework, I will focus on mechanical and dynamic factors creating gender inequalities in upgrading. The original approach does not have an intersectional analysis, but in my research, I add age, marital status, ethnicity, and sexual orientation to analysis. And next, I will analyze the role of governance and power in achieving gender equitable outcomes. Early studies of GVC literature, global value chain governance literature, have had a narrow focus based on firm-to-firm relations, just private governance. However, 2 years ago, a new typology of power was developed by a group of global value chain researchers. This typology allows researchers to understand the power relations in governance better than merely focusing on inter-firm relations. There are public, social, and hybrid governance as well, and each exercise different power in governance. It can be bargaining power, demonstrative power, institutional power, or constitutive power. Here is a demonstration of power dynamics in a parallel value chain. In data collection, the field study is inevitable. In this respect, I will conduct semi-structured interviews with factory and human resource managers and key informants, and a focus group discussion with workers. It will be purposive sampling to evaluate effectiveness of certain governance efforts. And as a conclusion, this research will provide an analysis of different outcomes of upgrading and downgrading based on gender in a parallel value chain. I'm sure it will be an empirical contribution to gender dynamics of global value chains, but I also expect theoretical and methodological contribution, because this type of gender analysis and economic and social upgrading has not been done yet. And it will provide an analysis of opportunities and challenges also for the gender equitable upgrading and downgrading through the governance in the global value chains. Thank you for your listen.
Very fast. So these talks here important, but anyway, we are gonna have more time for questions. So it's okay. And thank you very much. I may say that your project is the most difficult one to me, but I was very interested in the way you construct all the. It was not everything clear from my point of view, but because of me, but I think that it's very actual in a way. So we are talking about things that are discussed in everyday. So we have to. So we have, yeah, yes. Sorry. No, not a problem. Just to understand that doesn't matter if you want to. But no, so we go with Ayan, and yeah, you presented the paper with Sally last today, but
Good morning, everyone. This is Ayhan. I'm a PhD candidate in Kadir Has University's International Relations Department. Today, I'm going to present our joint paper with Professor Salih Bıçakçı. He's also my thesis advisor. The topic is on building up a gender-balanced cybersecurity culture for empowering the role of the woman. First of all, I need to say that I'm not coming exclusively from the gender studies. The topic is also very new, but I'm very motivated from the experiences that I see in the field and some stories, the personal stories that I experienced. For example, when I was presented, one of my first research in a cybersecurity community, I was just criticized because somebody anonymously tweeted that, okay, women are not good at cybersecurity. So the motivation was really personal also for me. And also we are very aware that we need to approach the topic from the wider gender research science. However, since we don't have many data and many resources, we thought that first of all, maybe starting with women can be a good approach for this. So maybe I can start with a brief introduction, which creates the background of the research. And this is a very new research, so I'm very open to the critics, including the concepts that I'm not aware and the ways that we can improve our profile and our studies. So as far as we know, the gender constructs the way who holds the power in families, in the society, and it's also same for the global security. And as we see from the decades that the genders can unequally participate in the global security studies. They are not there in the post-conflict processes, in the peace negotiations, in the public bodies, public offices. So this is a very, very problematic for the traditional security fields. However, with respect to the increasing embeddedness of the artificial intelligence technologies and the cyberspace, now we currently see the same trend in the cybersecurity. And we know that technology is not neutral in itself. Also, it entails the gender biases. And as we see in the classical hacker image that we also calling the hackers as with the young men with the hoodies and no woman in the field, also even in the daily language, we say that default the IT guy, right? So this is a very biased approach as well. So basically, this is a new research field for the cybersecurity people. And we are now aware that security is always has considered being a very technical and the gender neutral field. However, it is not, and it's rarely considers gender inclusion, because the gender effects from the cyberspace and from the cyber threats in different perspectives. However, it's not the solutions and the product, the market is not representing the same diversity that the users have. So there is basically two problems in the field that we see currently right now. First of all, we see a growing job market in the cybersecurity field because the cyber threats are increasing day by day. However, the genders and women are not here. So in addition to this, in the global cybersecurity policies, diplomacy, standards, global norm making, also there is no gender diversity over there, and the awareness is quite low. So currently, as I said, the focus will be on women, but we are very aware about the topic and the problems in the field. And today I'm trying to talk about what are the main causes which creates this problem in the field and how we can have some solutions to address these problems. So basically what we had and what we have now, in fact, we see some improvements, but it's not enough and it's not sufficient. And in 2013, it was like 11% of the global workforce were women. However, we saw some kind of improvement. And generally in the higher executive level, which are the chief information security officers, they're really, we see no diversity in the boards, in the decision-making bodies. It's increasing, it's improving, but day by day. So the problem is here, that we need more and more professionals in the field. However, we cannot catch the talents, best talents who are creating, representing the best diversity. But why diversity matters for cybersecurity? First of all, we see the masculinization of the technology. First of all, according to the research, that people who do not identify themselves as males do not believe that they are not good at the technology. Also, people who don't identify themselves as males, that they have few role models in the field, in technology industry, and the male-led design and use cases are not creating, are not reflecting the diversity in the field. So what's the rationale behind here? Cyber affects all us, right? We are facing a threat day by day, but the products, the solutions, the policies, decisions are not reflecting this diversity. So if they are not reflecting this diversity, if they are not reflecting all of us, we are not in security, right? We are not secure. This is a very basic calculation there. So also different genders, different socioeconomic levels, people are perceiving the security threats in different manners, and the current status in the field is not reflecting this diversity as well. So what can diversity bring us? Recent studies made some assumptions about the women's increased participation in the field, that they think that, for instance, female engineers sometimes bring different point of views to the table, and they ask different questions about the security perspectives. For instance, it was found that the females are using the privacy accounts better than males. So these are the different topics that how the mixed teams can better reflect the, better decision-making, conflict resolution, and the, it can maximize the creativity and innovation within the field. So this is why we need the diversity in the field. So the root cause behind this inequality, in fact, lies in the education, right? The STEM education is also very important, and the social barriers and the biases behind them. Because as far as we know, we have very strong stereotypes in science. Research found that for instance, generally women can better represent themselves in the health fields, in the human-centric fields. However, there is a very unfortunate bias that the male are better in the tech, in the math-oriented studies, and so the problem lies here that the source of the problem lies behind the education, and the system perpetuates it. According to the World Bank's numbers, and 107 of the 114 economies, there are fewer female than male STEM graduates. So it is also, the same problem we see in the countries who has a better gender ranking. So this is a global problem then. So when we have the lower graduates in the STEM, this leads that we have now lower graduates in the information and communication technologies. However, the issue was not like that, because in the early years of the computing, maybe you saw in the first slide, but the computing, firstly, the females started within this field. However, it changed because within the introduction of the, Commodore with the home computers and the marketing of the videos for the boys only changed the status, and women's participation in this field really steadily declined. And also, cybersecurity is very unique because it is representing the composition between the tech and the military, which is really, really reflecting a male-dominated industry. And so we see the problem in this field. I will go maybe very briefly, but the most significant part is in the job market, because even when we are trying to, organize panels, I cannot find any diverse speakers. I see every conferences and I just see the males, so they're looking at me, why are you here, something like that. So it's also problematic. And then, so the job market is also reflecting the same problem. And according to the Microsoft, for instance, this is a recent number, but 17% of the global cybersecurity workforce is only female, and this is like same number is like in the Turkey, 15% and 14% in North America. There are some main reasons behind it, that the unconscious bias, which people not aware of them, also the perception in the industry, the problems of lack of digital literacy, cyber literacy, the wage gaps was also very important, because women are globally earning less than the 3/4 of their male counterparts, and the socially constructed biases, lack of education, mentors, they are also problematic. The work culture represented in cybersecurity really consolidates this approach, because they think that, okay, 24/7 work culture is not good for the women, and then even the job postings are not, it's not reflecting the diversity. It's the language is not inclusive. It's not natural. So we can see also in the conferences, we see the bro culture. Like in the cybersecurity conferences, there is a bro culture. So this is consolidating these biases, and even the job advertisements are deterring the women and the other genders, of course. Cultural norms of the masculinity as the, they are representing the men as the barriers, as the protectors. So, and the others are represented at the ones who need to be protected. So this is another problem that we see in the field. There are some best practices, of course, because this topic is, getting more and more attention in the global sense. In Turkey, I'm not sure, but it is growing. So we are trying to lead this issue in our center with the GenderEx. So we are happy to do that. First of all, maybe I can give the example of Women for Cyber, because I'm one of the part of this issue as a mentee. We have a mentor-mentee program in this, and I have a very good mentor from Portugal, and we discuss the issues. And there are some free trainings that can we benefit. They are just have the job postings for us that we can, share within the community, and then how can we overcome the biases? And then International Telecommunication Union, which is a UN agency, also has kind of very good initiatives to tackle the barriers. And She Leads Tech is an industrial association. They're also dealing with this issue, but from a more industrial perspective. As I mentioned, there is a wage gap and the inequality about the earning of the women. However, this is also, this is getting better, because we see more, more gap in the baby boomer generation. However, now younger women experience less pay inequality, and this is, this is a trend that we are observing. However, it's not enough to address the main problem. The final two slides are just reserved for the recommendations, and it's, first of all, as I said in the beginning, the problem is how we define cybersecurity, because we define cybersecurity, we see it as a very technical, neutral field. However, it is not. So a redefinition, a reconsideration, first of all, is required, and it's needed. So this is because this is creating a blind spot within the field. And so what can industry do? What can state do? Maybe we can give some examples about it, because first problem is about the equality. Gender equality should be mainstream through an organization HR processes, because we have biases in recruitment, in job advertisement, in language that they are presenting, so it's important. Also, the payment opportunities, it should be reconsidered. Job announcements should be more should be presented with a more neutral language. So also the recognition of the fluidity of the gender and you know, the dismantling of the gendered construction of the jobs is very important. Currently, the industry is focusing on the trainings, right? The training and education, but none of them are thinking about the gender perspectives of training. So this is also a thing that maybe the other EU projects are also working on this, but this is a good opportunity for all of us that we can apply these kind of diversity and approach to the field. So scholarships, mentorships, from my personal experiences, I benefited a lot, so I can say that honestly. And of course, the resources should be allocated more to this field, and decision-making and the, you know, the equality and diversity in decision-making governance bodies is very important, because they are making something for us if they don't represent the needs. So this is a problem. And the entrepreneurs also should be encouraged. What should be done in national and international level? Briefly, I think that scholarship, the number of people who is working in the field is not sufficient for them, and we don't have a community. So this is a problem, because we don't have a network of researchers. So in terms of the academic embeddedness, academic integrity, I think that this can be a point that we can address. And the states, including Turkey, many countries are currently developing cybersecurity policies, national cybersecurity policies in national, regional, global level. However, they are not assessed with a gender perspective. So this is a problem. This is a blind spot as well. Capacity building, as I said, this should be reconsidered in national level, international level again, and the data that we can reach, as we can see in this presentation, that is not representative. So the problem about the collecting the data, you know, publishing the data is also a problem, and it should reflect this approach as well. And currently, some groups in the UN Open-Ending Working Group, and there are different types of the processes in the United Nations about how responsible state behavior can be conducted, can be developed in cyberspace, etc. So we have many kind of documents, legislation in the stuff. However, the diversity, the gender perspectives are not very embedded in the field, and this should be tackled, you know, in academic studies, in national field, in international field. So I can summarize in that way. I hope that I didn't make many mistakes about the concept. So thank you very much for listening.
You were perfect. Very glad anyway, no, it was very interesting. I was wondering just to change the mind, an organization of hacker female will be useful for this point of view, because as you said, yes, it's the male defensor, but they are also the one who attacks at the same time. So I think that could be a point. Anyway, it's a way to reflect on it. So we can go on with there, and then we can leave the video for another point. Okay, so she's already here. Sandra?
Yes.
So,
hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Sandra Cruz. I'm an architect and a graduate of Architecture and Urban Studies program in Kadir Has. And my research is on the Hagia Sophia Mosque after its conversion. I call it a gendered space of contest. Hagia Sophia Kebir Camii Şerifi was opened on the 24th of July 2020 with a ceremony that was broadcast online on TV and YouTube. During this 3-hour-long broadcast, signifying the conversion, the camera moves in and over the monument, catching from the tiniest expression of a worshipper to the impressive harmony of the congregation. Inside, there is the congregation of the protocol with their suites. The outside congregation Some of them fills the Hagia Sophia Square with social distance, and further, an unspaced crowd closes the streets to traffic. The first group also includes a couple of women bureaucrats, wives, and the First Lady at the segregated women's section. The restoration here was obviously incomplete to that day, and the pinkish prayer rugs are diverse and different from the main hall. For women, there were two more open areas designated at the outside as well, and only in the first few seconds of the stream, for once, this small group of female worshippers at the square is shown. But where do they disappear to after the official broadcast? How have they engaged with this new mosque afterwards? The opening ceremony discloses more to interpret the convergence ideology through its neo-Ottomanist symbolism, Islamic references, and the self-orientalist attitude. However, the majority of the arguments then have focused on the discursive messages of the conversion, examining less the physical changes applied, programs articulated, and continuing incidents in Hagia Sophia. In my visits to Hagia Sophia after the conversion, it was still captivating, but in a different fashion. In this new mosque, as the praying and tourism are sustained together, new experiences are generated and differ from the Republican Museum, Imperial Mosque, or church pasts of it. We witnessed a distinct choreography between the visitors and stewards, the controllers of the space. The ambiguity of coexisting functions makes a Debordian spectacle of Hagia Sophia that is marked by distinct gender segregation. It sets categories of tourists and worshippers and men and women, and controls the boundaries defining them. Are you visiting or going to pray? Men here and women there. But how do the users, the primary congregation of men, and women who are skipped in the first few seconds, or those who are absent in the official display altogether, experience and challenge this ordered space? In state proclamations, the new status would not detract in any way from Hagia Sophia's position as a museum. Correspondingly, the regular visitors are welcomed and encouraged to visit Hagia Sophia in the new program without the hindrance of figures and mosaics. Yet we are left wondering for whom the mosque would be indeed secluded or accessible. Here, the possibility of such inclusiveness is questionable, since the visiting experiences differ for its users in the actual use. Çiğdem Kafescioğlu had criticized some previous conversion proposals for Hagia Sophia, claiming that great historical mosques of significance like Hagia Sophia are deemed to be open to all, yet operate so under an increasingly sharpening gender hierarchy. Later, Esra Akcan noted upon the event that the conversion would change the perception and experience of the monument, especially for women and non-Sunni populations. Recently, Umut Azak presented her experience in Hagia Sophia after conversion, mentioning the women's section and separators. Inspired by their views, I suggest that examination of the gender aspects in the physical alterations made and users' experiences in Hagia Sophia would provide an important perspective on reading the conversion. In this study, I attempt to examine Hagia Sophia Mosque by site observations and tracing the spatial gender segregation means in terms of accessibility and mobility. In those, the gender segregation is illustrated, inspired by Marcus and Killian's public-private distinction frameworks. In the end, the research would approach the conversion debate by comparing the experiential reality with the advertised inclusiveness from the gender perspective and display how the continuing incidents form Hagia Sophia and reproduce its social meanings. I visited Hagia Sophia Grand Mosque between October 2021 and April 22, witnessing miscellaneous incidents in it at different times. On Fridays, the congregation overflows outside where the sermon and prayers are heard. At the other times, the square is of tourists coming from Topkapı or the nearby Blue Mosque. In Holy Ramadan, a line of light between the minarets, Mahya, becomes a spectacle of Sultanahmet. During the day, it gradually receives the congregation until noon prayer. Later, it is under the heavy flow of tourists, now freed from boats, only to be filled up again, and finally left in the silence of the night prayer. These colorful instances bring together many particularities of Ayasofya. In the historical peninsula of museums, it is a hot tourism destination that is a source of pride and propaganda, and the holy site not only for Muslims and Christians, but also for heritage studies on Istanbul's Byzantine and Ottoman periods. To accommodate the previously mentioned hybrid character, the refurbishment plan suggests that visitor and worshipper areas will be separated from each other, and routes for both will be designated. On one hand, it can be said that the conversion advertisement has become provocative and developed in time into a more careful narrative, drawing attention to the inclusiveness of Ayasofya, which would still welcome all under its dome. Yet, what constitutes the trick of all these scenes is the differentiation of one kind that is so naturalized and overlooked in mosques, but can be perceived when compared with Ayasofya's previous position as a museum. The gender distinction is experienced starting from the courtyard gate when we women cover our heads upon the warning of personnel. The entry is usually provided from the mixed doors, but for the exceptional crowd of Friday noon prayer, women and men split up into different queues. Inside, the ground floor is divided into 4 distinct zones by the prayer and visiting rules: the women's section, 2 places of worship, and the men's section. They are bordered with chic tapes, separators, or folding barriers. There are signboards, but the personnel also constantly circulate to inform and warn us about the occupancy rules. Where I noted as Zone 1 here, upon the entry, tagged place of worship, is a free area to all visitors for praying, wandering, playing, and various tourist activities. There are maksura areas as elevated platforms here, where people sit or pray, and interestingly, they are used by both genders interchangeably and differently each time. This Zone 1 is divided from Zone 2, which is also tagged place of worship, and genderless during the visiting time. Yet a little while before the azan, an announcement is made. Since the prayer time is closing in, the visits to the mosque are ended. We kindly ask our women guests in the mosque to move to the space on the left that is designated for them. After that, women are expected to empty Zone 2 through a gap between these dividing barriers. Then we women, children, and some tourists who didn't think of blending in with the male congregation align through these barriers. When some attempt to enter, guards warn them, fix and stabilize this border. We are unable to enter inside, except for kids crawling under, yet strongly enthusiastic about somehow being at or spectating this banned zone. Some women pray just before the barriers to see and feel the spiritual atmosphere, maybe, by being closer to the mihrab. The other option for us is the women's section at the north side nave. It is divided from the main hall by separators in a style that is common to mosques and religious settings with gender segregation. Wooden panels with geometric patterns like lattice or cage window covers. This confined and darker space designated for women doesn't have a direct visual connection to the minbar, mihrab, which are the qibla and prayer focuses by its position. And the rest of the hall is seen through the eye holes of the cage. On the crowded Friday noons, women can stay here only. They reach above the cage panels on their tiptoes or extend cameras to see the other side, the qibla and the impressive main hall filled with the male congregation. Once the prayer ends, men stand before the cage waiting for their accompanists. Some throw quick, sneaky glances out of curiosity. After a while, the women's section can be visited by male visitors, while the men's section, in principle, can't be stepped by women. Here, personnel warns and intervene women for praying near the mihrab and seeing the embellished qibla wall or veiled Virgin and the Child at the apse. Next to men continuing their non-obligatory prayer or touristic rituals, women transgress this cheek tape sometimes and sit by the edge of the section anyways, or quickly take photographs and get out until personnel warns them. And those 2 old women were requesting the personnel to take photographs of the Qibla for them. It was an interesting memory for me. The women's experience and appropriation of the mosque space in Turkey has been regarded strongly related to the spatial organization. Batuman explains how the women's sections, accessibility, and physical and visual connection to the Qibla are criticized by women in this regard. Ultimately, instead of experiencing a sacred atmosphere, the mosque rather becomes a space of anxiety for women by their bodily presence. From my experiences as a woman visiting Hagia Sophia Mosque at different times, I interpret that Hagia Sophia now is in a delicate interface of nested functions of prayer and exhibition. But women's position in this balance is also delicate and secondary despite the standard of conversion. In the ways that Hagia Sophia reveals, women's appearance in this contemporary mosque is marginalized, not only through the established socio-cultural codes, but also the space's shaping of them. The mosque space organization in Turkey usually sustains a tradition of non-inclusiveness and inequality, although architecture's agency in the experience of users is significant, as in the case of Hagia Sophia. When women want to spectate and experience the mosque or the monument, they are confronted with limits of borders and zones, whereas men enjoy those activities in pretty much every place, since the common tags already include them and more easily give up on women. Women's experience with Hagia Sophia discloses this complexity in different ways. They may prefer to be separated or not, even while praying. They can find comfort from distant from the male gaze, or wish to be in the open, in the spiritual atmosphere where all men and women are equal. Yet both separators and the designated places position seem to disallow this connection to that atmosphere. The separators may provide privacy, although men can still transgress it by the rather loose mobility they are granted within the space. And the women in the open at the main hall are not free from interference, as their position should be designated by borders and under the control of guards, announcements, and even other male visitors. Here I addressed that the conversion of Hagia Sophia Museum to a mosque was advertised with repeating statements of welcoming all, but in practice, the refurbishment keeps women's spatial status secondary. The barriers, boundaries, and tags continue to exclude and limit their experience of the space. In the end, I claim that the conversion's inclusiveness propaganda has been indeed invalid, yet the women's contingent crossings between separators can hint at a break of those inviolabilities for the future. Thank you for listening. I am developing this study for a more extensive research that will be my master's thesis. And I would like to thank my thesis advisors and my professors, Didem Kılıçkıran and Ezgi Tuncer, for their guidance.
I may say that I was very curious about your presentation because I was here a lot of years ago and I visited Hagia Sophia Museum. So I was just wondering how it is. And I think it's a lot also from a point of view, because I remember it was possible that also to go on an upstairs and visit all the spaces. So like to create a real space for anyway, thank you again. So now we are going to finish with a video from Sandra Cruz from University of Genoa Department of Architecture, and it's presenting the work with professor.
Good morning. Thank you very much.
Sorry. With the problem with the title "Learning and Practice Architecture."
Good morning. Thank you very much to the organizing and scientific committees for the opportunity to participate at the conference in remote mode. I'm so sorry that I can't be there with you. I'm Alessandro Meloni. Together with Cristina Canto, we are the authors of this presentation. And now I'm going to present some relationships between gender and architecture. This issue will be addressed in 5 phases. Which architects do you consider fundamental for their theories and works? This was a question some professor asked in the far-off 80s to first-year students in architecture. The answer often included some sacred monsters of the 20th century, like Le Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe, and Louis Kahn. Although some of their projects had their origins in the work of other architects, specifically female architects. Since the time women first gained, after a long struggle, the right to become architects, our society has come a long way. The first step was taken when women were admitted to the university course in architecture. In Europe, the first women graduated as an architect in 1890. In London, the Architectural Association accepted women from 1917, despite resistance and disagreement. The same reluctance was also seen in Germany in the progressive Bauhaus school, although the admissions policy officially stated any person of good repute, without regard to age or sex, whose previous education is deemed adequate by the Council of Masters, will be admitted as far as space limits. In fact, women were only welcome in some courses, and the same Walter Gropius was conceived that they were not physically and genetically qualified for certain arts, because men thought in 3 dimensions, while women could only cope with 2. In the USA, one of the first women graduates from Harvard was Anne Griswold-Ting in 1944, and she was one of the most important associates in the firm of Louis Kahn. Nowadays, the critics are aware of the role she had in various projects and how some of her work could be interesting. However, in university texts and classes, often the only name mentioned is that of Kahn. Dennis Scott Brown stated, "A body of theory and design in architecture apparently must be associated by architectural critics with an individual." She explained how the attribution to her of the main part of the seminal text Learning from Las Vegas, done jointly with her husband, Robert Venturi, and Stephen Isidore, has also been ignored by the critics. It is more effective to assign a building's architecture or theory to one strong personality, but where the attribution concerns a women, we can be sure that omissions occur. It is a question of numbers, because we can obviously find relevant female architects, as the famous David, the first woman to receive the Pritzker Architecture Prize. The episodes mentioned are extremely important in the history of architecture, but the problem we are trying to pose, not to solve, is if men really deserve more to become architects because of a natural inclination. We may note that the women are currently the majority of students in architecture, and we are aware that professors and successful architects are mostly men. And we will try to clarify some of the aspects related to some abilities we can detect during the architectural degrees and master's degree courses. To address this issue, it is important to define a general framework on the current situation regarding the role of women within the architectural world, both from an educational and working point of view. We intend to analyze the Italian architectural context where the gender difference, despite good intentions, is still quite evident. The university is the main institution where some dynamics can be interpreted as the reflection of what happens in the working world. At the state university level, new enrollments see the presence of women as 55.6%, while at the University of Genoa, the situation is slightly better. The growing increase in female university population also occurs within the architecture departments. In Genoa, the presence of women is still predominant, and the percentage is 56.4%. The female component therefore becomes a principal in the architectural world, thus rebalancing the numerical disparity that characterized the previous decades. The next step after graduation involves enrollment in the professional register. The numerical majority of the new generation members are women, while the older generations are for the most part men. The data reveals how in the last century, architecture had a preference for men and how the situation is currently changing. The balance that is being generated, unfortunately, still refers only to numerical value, because some cliches that place women in the background are still evident, such as the phenomenon of the gender pay gap. It could be interesting to compare the professional reality with the success effectively achieved by women during their studies in architecture. For this reason, we will analyze the whole educational path of architectural representation discipline at the University of Genoa, the course of representation workshop 1 and the course of methods of representation for the project. We will compare different tests and results obtained by students, paying attention to the differences between women and men. The analysis stems from a rather simple consideration that refers to the students' abilities and how very often the best results are obtained by female pupils. These characteristics not confirmed subsequently in the working world, where the most prominent figures are men. The proposed survey has a qualitative and not statistical value. At this stage, the results reveal significant aspects, and the data obtained allows us to draw interesting insights about the capabilities of the space and about the results at the end of the final examination. As regards the representation workshop 1 course, many aspects can contribute to the correct execution of the test. The school of origin is certainly a relevant factor because depending on the type of studies carried out, it is possible to have more or less specific information of the course. The tests investigate the students' ability to understand the geometry of simple solids and the spatial arrangement. Questions relate the three-dimensional form to a coded representation method, but also tests in which the recognition of the respective images is required according to the fundamental laws of Euclidean geometry. The questions formulated have been developed following scientific and methodological studies related to teaching. In the second part of the test, the pupils had to redrawing some parts of the exercises. In particular, they were asked to recognize the elements that make up a composition of solids and to identify the possible relationship between the two volumes. The results of this test show that only 19% of the total number of students reached the highest grade, and the female gender was more satisfactory compared to male students. Overall, the proposed tests reveal the tendency of the part of the female gender to obtain results in a better percentage, revealing an attitude for study and understanding space. This trend can also be seen in curves of method of representation for the project. The female gender emerged in percentage compared to male, yet despite this, the architectural award is still attributable to the male gender. This study aims to highlight the relationship between the female and the architectural world through a historical and contemporary perspective. The contribution is part of a broader research that concerns the study of different spatial perceptions by gender and various abilities, and which is focused on the field of university education. The results obtained are significant and reveal the ability of women to emerge and achieve better results than men. Making the results known allows to begin a more process of deepening the matter to face more and more consciously the problem of gender disparity in the architectural field. This process can contribute to debunking, after 100 years, the prejudice enunciated by an important figure like the architect Walter Gropius. I have finished. I hope to meet you soon in person, and thank you very much for your attention.
Good morning, everyone. Greetings from Dublin. My name is Sandra Cruz. Currently, I'm in
the session. So they just informed me that at the moment they cannot listen when I spoke, but anyway, we are on a question time. Yes.
You need the microphone?
Ciao Cristina, così. They just told me that for a moment it was not possible to hear my voice when I was interventing. By the way, I was not saying interesting things. The best was done by the speakers. So we are on a question time. So if someone of you have some question from our attendee, okay, Sara. Ah, microfono. Voilà.
Yeah, thank you very much for your very interesting papers. I have a question to Insi, for Insi. Insi, I have seen that since the last gender school, your research has advanced a lot. So congratulations. It is very well, your theoretical framework is very well designed, and you have, it has advanced a lot. So I was very impressed by that. For the methodology, you went very quickly. I know that there are times constraints here. And I want to know if you could elaborate a little bit more. You are doing interviews and focus groups, like with interviews with HR and managers and also focus groups. Like, what are you trying, in these interviews and these focus groups, what you are trying, what kind of data you are trying to collect, and who you are in the focus groups? You are interviewing workers. Are you interviewing only women workers? Are you interviewing, how are you doing this? It would be very interesting to know, because you went very fast through that part. And that's it. Congratulations.
I will make the semi-structured interviews with HR managers and factory managers. From factory managers, I collect the data of economic upgrading, and it's gender equitable, if it is gender equitable. And from the HR managers, I will collect the data related to social upgrading, and its gender dimension, its intersectionalities. And there are also key informants. It could, for instance, academics, unions, employment associations, for instance, İşkur in Turkey, and ILO. I made some of these interviews, but they are pre-interviews, let's say. And for the focus group discussion, I will talk with the men and women workers, all the workers. There is no gender limits for this data collection. And from the reason to make these group discussions with workers is to hear the story from their eyes, because the managers are sometimes they don't be willing to share the actual data. So it is necessary to listen this type of the story. That's it.
Thank you.
We have another question.
Thank you all very much for your papers, including Alessandro. I hope you can hear me as well. So Alessandro, thank you very much as well. I have a question for Ayhan. Yeah. I think your paper and your work is really important work, because I think that it is developing a whole new area of research in cybersecurity. So I think you should be very proud of breaking new disciplinary ground there, okay? I noticed that you mention the use of power in your one of your early slides. And as you went through the slides, I wasn't quite sure where power figured in all of that as an analytical frame. So I just wondered if you could elaborate a little bit more on how you're going to use that really important concept to illuminate everything that you're trying to do.
Thank you very much. I believe that this is a very important point of view, because since this is a new study, I believe we did not develop its theoretical framework in a very proper way. However, the initial idea was that this relying on the power relations in terms of assessing the relations in cybersecurity and in terms of the gender perspective. I believe that this can create the theoretical basis of the research and definitely should be elaborated more. And you're very right, it was not elaborated in this sense because it's very initial and the beginning of the study. Also, I am sure that we should integrate it in the whole paper then. Thank you. Very important point.
I'm arriving.
Sorry, my apologies. I just want to follow up that by saying that that there are lots of feminist analysis of power that I think could be hugely helpful to your development of that concept. and that they really must be integrated into that. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have time for the last question, and I think so.
Thank you all. And my question is for Sare Nuralci. It was very well structured and enriching presentation. Thank you very much. And your subject is very interesting, I think. Please excuse me for missing the beginning part of your presentation. So maybe you already mentioned it before, but my question is in Islamic tradition, as far as I know, women's participation in mosque prayers to attend worship in mosque community is not seen obligatory, including Friday prayer, for example. And also there is an initiation, maybe I'm sure you know, it's called Kadınlar Cami'de and organized by, I think, practicing Muslim women people. So, but some of them, contrary to this Islamic tradition, some women are not agree with that view, and they want to participate and show their presence in mosque. Did you make any interviews with these women about their concerns and about their presence and demands about being able to a part of the mosque, and or maybe you can make in future? So my question is like methodology, and did you ever talk with these women about their views on this topic? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Actually, the paper that I could present here was a small part of what I did so far, and I am also starting my thesis next year, and for my thesis, my methodology includes ethnographic research like that, and like as you said, Kadınlar Camiler'de was a very interesting case for me too. I examined their writings about some other mosques, but it was mostly like they were mostly around the time when Hagia Sophia was just open, so I couldn't reach information about that. I really want to conduct some interviews with them too. And for the thesis, I'm expecting to have diverse views like that. Like maybe it would, like so far it's my observation and spatial analysis. But I also know that for women who are not like practicing there or just visiting the space are also a bit complaining as far as I could see. But I would definitely want to hear the practice and prayer aspect of it. And I really want to see that too. Thank you.
I have a more technical question about the Hagia Sophia. I noticed that when you talked about the opening day and you showed the women's section photo, that the prayer rugs were pink. Are they still pink? And is the men's section blue? I mean, I noticed the men's section, I mean, the majority of the rugs are kind of blue, greeny thing. And I'm just curious if the women's section is pink still.
Yeah, actually the rugs are special. They are like made special in turquoise color. And the interesting point there was that in the opening day, the restoration for that part was not complete. So they did that like patchy rugs with that opinion, and it was also reflecting something in my opinion. And now they are green and all homogeneous in every place. It seems so, at least.
On the train, see. Okay. So we have still time for some questions, but I have just a reflection because I have to congratulate the one who put together these talks, because I had the impression that everything is related with a normal perception of a space, let's say the Hagia Sophia, the economic situation or the cybersecurity, and how it can change the perception of the same space from a gender perspective, putting barriers inside the mosque or watching the economic from another side. So it's quite interesting that we are talking about the same things, but the perspective is going to change just because the point of view we are looking at it. So I think that that is very interesting. Now this metaphor is much more clear for me because we were talking about architecture. Of course, it was the same yesterday, but now I got it much more clear. So it's exactly, we have a space, but if you put a barrier, the same space can look completely different path to go from one side to the other. So do you have some other questions in here? No, it was just relaxing the arm. Okay. So, don't know, yeah, why not? It's a coffee time then. So feel free to have nice biscuits. Thank you very much to all of you.
I'll borrow this one. Different job now. Okay. Welcome to our last, but absolutely certainly not least panel. Basically part 2, technology, economics, and architecture. Just made a little change to the schedule. Sandra Cruz is a video, so I'll just put it to last. And then I think since we've done the format of having everybody introduce themselves, I think let's continue. That would be great. We're going to start with Valeria and Sara. So the floor is all yours. I don't know where you want to speak from. Okay, you come here.
Yeah. Sorry.
We have to take this one out first. Sure. No. Bitti mi? Ha. Which one was yours? This one? No. This one. Yes. There you go.
Do you hear us? Okay, perfect. Good morning, everyone. I am Valeria Piras, a PhD student in design at the University of Genoa, and I'm in my second year of PhD. And in my research project, I analyze and deconstruct design pedagogy from a critical and feminist perspective. And good morning, everyone. I'm Sara Jebole, a PhD student in design at the University of Genoa, and I'm in my first year. In my path, I'm concerned with investigating the gender stereotypes that persist in society and are reflected in the design artifacts that result in social responsibility of designers. First of all, we want to thank the previous presentations of today and yesterday because we're so enriching and inspiring. Today, we want to tell you why and how our individual researchers meet with the goal of filtering through the lens of gender studies, the discipline of design, bringing this investigation for the first time in our design research group in Genoa. But what is design? Design is a very broad discipline that shapes different kinds of artifacts, such as communication, visual artifacts, industrial products, interior design, services, interactions, and more. In order to make evident what is the link between design and gender issues, we decided to introduce our discussion by starting with some simple case studies. One of the embodiments of the specific field of communication design is advertising. Here, you can see an advertisement poster for a ketchup bottle of the Alcoa aluminum brand, published in 1953 in America. As you can see, this advertisement reproduces a stereotype that sees the woman as a weak being who is usually not considered capable of physical exertion without the help of a man. Or, as you can see in this image, advertisement of the Thai brand Weihausen, published in 1951, a stereotypical family context is enacted in which the male figure dominates over the weakness and subjugation of the female figure in an explicit way. Or again, this advertisement for a beer brand published in 1952. These images seem distant, obviously, now to contemporary eyes, but they are useful in understanding how far communication design, and not only communication design, but the entire field of design, from research to practice, through the production of different kinds of tangible and intangible artifacts, can be and has been responsible for the perpetuation and materialization of stereotypes and oppressions, conveying cultural models closely linked to the subjectivity of the designer and embracing social constructs. These images now seems distant to contemporary eyes, but stereotypes, thought not as shamelessly as in the 1950s advertising cases shown, can be found, for example, in the design of children's product, as shown in the 2005 photographic project, the Pink and Blue Project, by the Korean artist Jung Mi-yoon, where she aims to denounce how the customer society in which we live has appropriated the stereotypical use of colors as a means of targeting its products and increasing sales. In the wake of this approach, we find the phenomenon of pinkification, that is the tendency to color everyday objects in pink, or its surrogates, to deliberately attract purchase by the feminine public. Another recent case that sparked a strong debate in Italy was the one of Immuni, the COVID-19 virus infection tracking app. The controversy arose because of the image that was used in the app's interface, where a stereotypical representation of a family appeared. A man portrayed at the computer intent on working, while in the next window, a woman is depicted with a baby in her arms. After accusation of sexism, Immuni changed graphics. In the new version, it's the man who cares for the child, while the woman works at the computer. While the role reversal did not result in a total departure from the stereotypes, as it was still a canonical family consisting of a white heterosexual couple that was represented, it was interesting to see how the first depiction, albeit in recent times, clearly perpetrated a gender bias and how it sparked a heated controversy, which ended with a change of the depiction. These were just some simple examples of the problems of this topic. These were focused just on the binary distinction between men and women. But in the discourse can be involved genderless and intersectional perspective that we face in our both research, but from time reason, we can't show everything to you today. And going on with the speech, in all of this, we can see how much responsibility the designer has in generating artifacts of meaning. But how can we form this responsibility? These issues are the starting point for our two different pieces of research. Considering the context that we are the responsibilities of the designers and the impact that design has in today's society, the research wanted to address in a parallel two different application paths. the pedagogical and educational context of design, in which the discipline itself and those who will put in practice are shaped, and the professional business context, the place in which artifacts are made concrete. First of all, we start with the pedagogical research. The design pedagogical and educational context is the place where design takes shapes, innovates, and can transform itself. Design is usually taught as a technical, neutral, and apolitical subject, but as the example cited above prove, this is not true. Design is always political. Ruben Pater, a researcher and designer, argues in his amazing text, The Politics of Design, that design can never be universal and objective because designers, but also those who benefit from designs, are endowed with cultural biases. Considering design a discipline that can universally converse in the same way is a utopian thing, if not perhaps even dystopian, because it will mean aspiring to a flattened reality devoid of cultural diversity. The educational context is a place that, using the words of feminist educator and writer Bell Hooks, can lead to freedom. Using her words in the text, Teaching to Transgress, she says, "Home was the place where I was forced to conform to someone else's image of who and what I should be. School was the place where I could forget that self and through ideas reinvent myself." Starting, in fact, from gender issues in relation to educational context of design, in my research, I wanted not only to look at the content taught and designed from a gendered point of view, but to analyze the pedagogical methodologies and educational approaches applied in the design academias in Italy, restarting from pedagogical theories that come from feminist studies. Taking inspiration from Paulo Freire critical pedagogy and the consequent feminist pedagogy theory, in which Bell Hooks was one of the most important theorists, which are pedagogical theoretical lines based in particular on placing at the center of the educational context the awareness of the power structures of society, and on the deconstruction of the classical student-teacher hierarchy, the aim is to take into analysis and deconstruct the current pedagogical model of design in Italy. So the goal of the research is to try to experiment new educational methodologies finalized to work on shaping responsibilities and consciousness about cultural biases and power structures in design process, restarting from mentioned critical and feminist theoretical lines. In particular, from February 2023, the research will be enriched with the opportunity to take part as assistant at an educational experiment within the project Educating Otherwise at the FHNW University in Basel, Switzerland. A project designed by the researcher Maya Ober, the founder of Depatriarchized Design Research Project, with the goal of experimenting with her an educational approach coming from feminist pedagogy in an educational design context. The final aim will be to collect data and experimentation and then bring a proposal for experimentation to the Italian educational context in Genoa. The design world is evolving rapidly, and innovative thinking requires studies and education. Where can the basis for a good discussion of the relationship between design and gender can be identified? The Design Act, etymologically oriented toward the future, must contribute to the diffusion of a new approach by means of an innovation that the design landscape needs. No longer following what has been imposed by ancient customs and traditions, but creating a new dimension free from social constructions. During a period of internship, which will be in an Italian corporate, the placement in this corporate will be a value resource to be able to touch upon with what emerged in the first research period, going to analyze the strengths and weakness in a real-world context to more consciously develop critical thinking about the role that a large company can play. This will be a very interesting This will be very interesting because the internship is going to be in a corporate who's well known for a brand who's really attached to the stereotypical representation of gender roles in the family context. During the internship period, I will try, following the survey and data collection phase, to implement a series of meetings with the staff of different sectors within the company. The activity will be aimed to training workers to raise awareness of issues related to the ongoing research project. How? First of all, drafting of a questionnaire designed to collect data with respect to customers' perception of the company in relation to social sustainability, obviously related to gender and gender equity. Analysis of the data collected and return of the data. Sharing of the information obtained and data collected with the communication, graphic design, social brand identity, etc. teams. And then to conclude, a cycle of meeting with the company employees to return what has been developed to create new known. So explain our two research. Having carried out the two research experiences, the aim will be to compare data and results, allowing for a view on the design discipline in its entirety, with the aim of consolidating awareness on the role that gender studies can play in the field of design. We bring gender topic for the first time at the Genoa Design Group of Research, with the intention of concretizing the path through continuous research and dissemination to generate responsible design and designers. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're just going to continue right on to the next. So then you're up next. Let's get. Should be. If you're not, we'll just go back to the desktop.
Hi, I am Sandra Cruz. I'm a PhD student at Kadir University Social Policy Department. Today, I will share some information about Turkish women engineers. As you know, engineering is male-dominated profession. Despite the differences in the representations of women in engineering in different countries, its characterization and conception as a masculine profession remains the same. Women are minority in this field at both academic and the professional level, more so than in other specialized professions. This fact should be evaluated in relation to gendered culture of technology. Technology has never been neutral in terms of gender and has been constructed culturally and historically as a masculine. The history of technology provides examples of fields which were crowded with women in the beginning, but developed into naturally masculine domains or vice versa. According to the latest data released by Eurostat, 59% of engineers and scientists are men and 41% of are women in EU. When we look at Turkey, this rate is 43% women and 57% is men. The ratio of women scientists and engineers in Turkey, it's above the EU average, according to the statistics. But their position in their labor market is quite unequal. This relatively high rate compared to other countries should not mean that Turkey offers a non-sexist labor market for women engineers and scientists. Why Turkey has got a relatively high women labor in STEM? First one is high population and low-cost labor. More than 80 million people is living in Turkey. It needs low-cost labor, and this low-cost labor is provided from women for most of industry. Second one is concentrate specific STEM areas. Women are more greatly represented in some engineering departments than others. For example, at all universities in Turkey, for last year, percentage of female students was 67% in food engineering and 56% in environmental and chemical engineering, but only 13% in mechanical and civil engineering and 14% in electrical and electronics engineering. These ratios clearly illustrate that a substantial gap between these two groups of engineering. Women are highly represented in engineering fields that believed to be clean, sterile, light, comfortable, and silent. It's also believed that they don't use bodily strength. However, considering the case of electrical and electronical engineering, which requires mostly lab or office work and intellectual activity, this argument seems contradictory. In other words, despite its cleanness and softness, it's still male-dominated area. Last one is the National University Entrance Exam in Turkey. Most of university departments accept students who get the highest score in the National University Entrance Examination. I think that the absence of the interviews positively affects the number of women students in engineering faculties. And I did a field research with a small group of engineers and technicians who are working at research and development departments of technology companies. They are working in automotive, durable consumer goods, and information and communication industries. I took survey and depth interview, and there are 90 survey participants and 12 for interviews. Women engineers have many problems with their profession in Turkey, but I will only mention a few today. There is one is gender-based segregation in research and development departments. More basic engineering development areas are male-dominated, such as thermodynamics, electronic technologies, technical and machine designing. And there are more women or gender equilibrium in more social areas, such as project management, project follow-up and reporting, administrative tasks related to the research and development fields. We can define it some kind of internal segregation in it. And when I look to seniority, as you see, employees with more than 10 years seniority are 79% men. 62 of those with 5 to 10 years seniority are male. And 65 of the seniority of women is less than 5 years. The survey results shows us that the majority of senior employees are men. And career promotion expectation, the highest group of the career expectancy is mid-level managers with 83%. And 80% of women technicians don't have a career or promotion expectancy. Career expectancy is the highest group of male engineers with 88%. And 77% of mid-level women managers have career promotion expectations. And this is the relation between project or patent application and between having children. It's seen that having children has a significant effect on the patent or project application averages of women. 67% of engineers with no patent application are women with children. An interesting piece of data is that men with children outperform men without children in the patent application. As a result, women engineers have struggled with male-dominated engineering culture while performing their jobs. Their seniority, career, and promotion prospects and patent project applications are relatively lower than male peers. Gender of female engineers comes before their professional identities. Randy Faulkner says that visibility or invisibility paradox. Though the concept of the visibility paradox Faulkner argues that while women are highly visible as a woman, but they are invisible as an engineer. And what can be done? First of all, we should free the education system from the gender stereotypes and developing social policies for women working in the field of technology. Strong and inclusive education and social policy changes necessary for Turkey, but it's very hard to build it within Turkey's current situation. The strongest of the reason behind these problems, undoubtedly authoritarian and conservative power discourse in Turkey. A second one is a social responsibility project of technology companies. Many companies are implementing employment policies that will increase the number of women engineers within the scope of social responsibility campaigns for the sexist problems and practices faced by women engineers in the labor markets. In addition, many NGOs are carrying out many useful projects related to this issue. These contributions of NGOs and women organizations are very important and valuable. However, these campaigns and projects produce small-scale problems. They don't offer a permanent solution to this problem, which can be expressed nationally or even internationally. The absence of long-term comprehensive policies aimed to solving fundamental problems such as sexist educational structure cannot offer a bright future for the situation of female engineers in gendered labor market in Turkey. In any case, it's very important to support women organizations and NGOs. In addition, it's critical to create public pressure on the government through them, because the effect of the technology is great in determining and directing to the future. Taking equal share in the production of technology is important in terms of breaking down the stereotypes and building more equal worlds. Thank you for listening.
Seven mentioned the university exam. And those of you who live here know that this weekend was the university exam. Universities accept students in this country through a nationwide centralized exam. We do not choose our own students. So it's very interesting to think about what might change if universities could at least play a part in choosing students. I also had a personal stake. My son took the university exam this weekend. So hopefully I'll send out some good thoughts to all those students. The second part of the exam ends in about 20 minutes. So there's a lot of suffering young people this weekend. We'll move on now to our third presentation, Mariko.
The floor is yours. Let's close this and see what happens. Okay, this is cute. One of these should be yours.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Okay, can you hear me? Is that good? Yeah? Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Mariko. I'm a PhD student with about a year-ish left to go at Lund University in the south of Sweden. I'm in a small division of human ecology, which is within the Department of Human Geography. And the paper that I wrote for this conference is something that I'm going to turn into one of my empirical chapters for my monography. And I've entitled it Unsustainable Fashion, the Co-optation of Feminism and Sustainability in the Fast Fashion Industry. So I look mostly or specifically at Swedish fast fashion companies. Part of that is kind of for practical reasons because it's too big to look at all the fast fashion companies in the world, but also because Sweden actually plays a really big
role in the world of fast fashion. And we have some large companies, including H&M, for example, which is the second biggest fast fashion company in the world. So I think for this presentation, I'm gonna go, part of it will be more in detail talking about the specific paper, but then I'll try to also give some broader contextualization of my whole project so that it hopefully will make a bit more sense to people who aren't necessarily in the field of fashion. So mainly what I'm looking into is the way that feminism and sustainability or environmental friendliness is being co-opted within the fashion industry. And I look at different ways that this is being co-opted. So the aspects that I'm mostly interested in are discursive ways. So one of them is through reporting, so sustainability reporting, for example. Another one is through advertisements. So I look at a lot at advertisement campaigns in terms of images and videos and also social media ads. And then I have also conducted interviews with sustainability managers at Swedish fashion companies. So that's kind of the bulk of the material that I'll be talking about today. Okay, so I started seeing kind of an acceleration of sustainability discourse and also feminist discourse being pushed by and included in fashion and fast fashion communication. And that's kind of what sparked my interest in this topic. And throughout my research, what I've seen is that there is quite a lot of research on gender within fashion and media. There is also quite a lot of research in terms of sustainability and the environment within marketing in general, but also within the world of fashion. Sustainability has become a hugely important problem and aspect that almost all fashion companies talk about now, because you can't really get away with not talking about it anymore. But I guess the gap that I've noticed is looking at the intersection between gender and the environment. So that's kind of the intersection that I'm really trying to get at through my research. Okay, so looking at it broadly, I argued that the dominating narrative in the fast fashion industry right now is a neoliberal one. It's a one that it's very much tied to growth logic, and it's one that is very techno-optimistic. So a lot of the time, so this, for example, is it's an advertisement, a marketing campaign through a YouTube video, but it's also pertaining to a particular project that H&M has, where they use new technology to recycle different types of fibers. So recycling schemes have been a really big part of fast fashion companies' sustainability strategies. But when it comes to how this is actually done, it's often quite vague. So a lot of companies have take-back schemes where you can bring bags of old clothes and donate it to them, and then you get like a voucher with a discount code if you buy from them again, something like that. But in reality, recycling clothes is actually very difficult for a number of reasons. One of the biggest ones is that most garments within fast fashion are not made from like one pure fiber. So it's actually really difficult to like pull them apart. So this is an example of kind of the techno-optimism and like the futuristic imagery that a lot of companies use. And circularity is another concept that's very popular within these companies. So they talk a lot about the circular economy and how they're going to make the whole industry circular. And what I've noticed there is also that this is quite broad and often quite vague. It's become a buzzword that's used a lot, but when it comes down to specifics, it's usually a bit confusing as to what they actually mean. So bringing it back to the aspect of gender, there are a few reasons why I think it's really important to talk about gender when we talk about sustainability in the fashion industry. And I would almost take it as far as saying you cannot really talk about sustainability in fashion industry without looking at gender. That's such an important aspect that enriches these kinds of studies. Clothes are something that's really intimate. It's obviously on our bodies. I think it's very much tied to desire, it's tied to image, emotions, and it's also very much tied to gender norms and gender expectations and subjectivities. And continuing on this theme of gender, feminism and the concept of female empowerment is something that's used a lot as well in fast fashion discourse. Let me just see if I need to. Okay, we'll look at this one quickly. So what I argue is that in a lot of these marketing campaigns and also within the discourses of the sustainability reporting, I've noticed that a dichotomy is created where women's subjectivities are kind of constructed into this global north versus global south dichotomy, where Western women of the global north are often constructed through marketing and through language as being empowered women who can reach this female empowerment through the act of consumption. So through buying clothes that are perhaps organic or made out of organic cotton or whatever it might be that they're promoting at the time, they can empower themselves to become these powerful women. But also what's often suggested is that they can help make this world a better or more sustainable or more ethical place. So the suggestion is that if you buy this product, you're empowering yourself, but you're also saving the environment. And you're also perhaps saving these other women who have produced these clothes for you. So this is a dichotomy that I find extremely problematic and something that I think is important to kind of deconstruct. I have an example of an image from an ad here. So this is from a Swedish fast fashion company advertisement on YouTube. The whole ad is kind of produced as a music video. So there's like singing and dancing. And the story is that this Swedish actress is singing about organic cotton denim. And she goes to India and meets these colorful, beautiful women who are supposed to be the workers, I suppose. And in this particular scene, she's singing about how using chemicals wisely is more cool. And there's another scene where she is singing about how this company is teaching the locals of the importance of like taking your children to school. And so I see a lot of problematic imagery here. And although this ad is quite obviously distasteful, what I argue is that the logic and the attitudes that kind of make this type of imagery possible is something that exists, and it's very much infused into the language that's used in these companies. It might be in a more subtle way. This is an example of like a very overt image of like neo-colonial attitudes and a lot of this Western saviorism. But what I found through my interviews is that those attitudes exist on other levels as well. So in some of the material that I analyze in this paper, I kind of broke it up into themes, and one of them that popped up was the democratization of fashion. And then another one is the narrative of global development. So a lot of these companies really utilize the language of global development in order to justify the way that the fashion world operates and the way that it looks. I mean, globally, it's about roughly 85% of garment workers are women. And the argument that's often used by companies is that, well, this is a great global employer. This is bringing women out of poverty. This is allowing women to move away from the rural areas into the cities. They can work in these factories and they can provide for their families. And this is a narrative that's become really strong. It's, I've seen it through my interviews as I write in this paper, but it's also apparent in sustainability reporting and also in advertisements like this. So that's kind of how I'm trying to combine these different types of materials to show how this narrative kind of keeps getting circulated and strengthened. And one of the things that's interesting with this point of global employment and global development narrative is that obviously garment work globally is very, very poorly paid. It does have variations depending on the country and depending on like minimum wage laws, but in general, it's a poorly paid job, and it has been for a very long time. And so on the one hand, we have this really techno-optimistic view of like soon when technology saves us, when we have all these recycling technologies, the whole fashion world is going to be fossil free, it's going to be green, it's going to be automized, and it's going to be ethical, right? But on the other hand, we see in reality that the whole industry is extremely reliant on cheap labor. And this techno-optimistic narrative doesn't really explain how the industry is going to stop being reliant on cheap labor, because that's the only way that it can remain as profitable as it is. An author named Ashok Kumar has written a really great book called Monopsony Capitalism. So he explains the global fashion industry as being built on monopsony, which is kind of the inverse of monopoly. So in a monopolistic system, we have few buyers, no, hang on, few, let me get this right, few suppliers and a lot of buyers. Monopsony is the inverse of that. So we have a lot of suppliers, so a lot of factories that are competing for these fashion companies to buy garments from them, and a few number of large buyers. And he argues that what this system of monopsony does is that it creates a downward push onto the suppliers. So the factories have a lot of pressure on them to have very quick turnover, to have very favorable prices, because otherwise the buyers will stop buying from them. They'll go elsewhere. They'll go to another factory, or they might even go to another country. And this is what we've seen, how garment production used to be mainly in China and India, and then it moved to Bangladesh, it moved to Cambodia. Now it's a lot in Myanmar. So it keeps shifting to cheaper and cheaper and cheaper places. Let me see how I'm going on time. I've gone over time already. Okay, so, okay, great. Okay, so I'll just quickly go to the, go back to the aspect of the essentializing of gender, just because I think that's an important part to kind of tie this together. So yesterday I made a comment about environmental responsibility. So this is also something that I see playing into this dichotomy of women of the global north and the global south, where in the literature of sustainable development in the global north and gender, we see how the environmental responsibility or the burden of sustainability is often placed onto women. We often see how women are more willing to shift their lifestyle to become more sustainable. And what I argue in my research is that fashion companies play into this logic. So they specifically target ads to women to say you should buy these products because they're made out of these great things, or you're helping these poor women in these other countries. So it's a process of othering and also a process of placing the burden of environmental responsibility onto women. And on the other hand, in the global south as well, through literature, we see that the environmental responsibility or burden is disproportionately placed on women there as well. It might not always be through the act of consumption. It can be through the act of like land management, for example, or bringing water into the household, those types of things. So even though it might look in different ways, what we often see is that environmental burden is disproportionately heavily placed onto women. And I see this through the interviews and also through this, the type of imagery that I showed before in the ads. And I argue that this is a reflection of the old and essentialistic view that we have on women, that they are closer to nature, therefore they are more nurturing, they might have superior knowledge of the environment, which I argue is a false kind of dualistic notion that's now being weaponized in a way that in the end kind of just punishes women even more. Okay, I'm not going to go over the time anymore. Yeah, thank you. That's it.
We're talking in the break that on the 8th of March, there's always a slew of commercials, right, celebrating women. And this year, I noticed that the commercial from the energy and environment and whatever else is in that ministry, the kind of catch-all ministry, it seems like, was basically women do everything. Oh, and don't forget to save the planet too. By the way, you have this new responsibility. We were talking in the break, and I basically kind of joked. I said, oh, okay, well, if we have all the responsibility, maybe we should have all the power for change. I think that would be appropriate. Pushing on to our next speaker, it's all you.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Nihan, and my pronouns are they, them. It has been a pleasure to listen all of these wonderful works. And firstly, I would like to thank everyone who contributed to the conference, and also Kadir Has University, which hosted this conference. The work I will present to you today will be a part of the outputs of my undergraduate thesis that I created when I was a baby researcher who wanted to study the sociology of space in 2019. I think you may be tired at this point in the conference. That's why in this presentation, I found it more appropriate to share the outputs of my thesis, in which you can hear the voices of the women I interviewed, rather than the lots of theoretical and methodological aspects of the study. Because I think this part is much more in line with the aspect of gender, which is the main artery of this conference. However, before I come to this part, I need to talk about the layers of my work. As a person who grew up in Beyoğlu, which is a very famous neighborhood in Istanbul. I took a different path from the works I had come across and searched for a subject which constantly experiences the same place, but it's not the subject of the studies due to their otherness. Furthermore, I thought of the Romani woman whose voices I was very familiar with in my childhood, selling lavender and flowers on Istiklal Street. Istiklal Street is also a much more famous place in Beyoğlu. I think because due to their political background, their queer background, and also the gentrification process, lots of them, they have lots of deep baggage in there. They filled almost all the otherness boxes because they were women and belonged to the Romani community and also did such an invisible job. As a sociologist candidate interested in oral history, I wanted to hear their special perception of Beyoğlu. At this point, I learned one of the biggest lessons of my life, both as a researcher and as a human being also. I made an oral history interview with two women. One of them is a lavender seller, and one of them is a flower seller in Istiklal Street. And of course, the oral history that I use as a method also has a very important place in this situation. Although I have not fully fulfilled a few things that she has often stood on in the short tutorial I received from dear Professor Leyla Neyzi, to see the experiences of the common womanhood in the lives of these lavender and flower selling women, whose number is decreasing day by day, and now finished actually, has enabled me to see how much the traumas and the experiences affected the memory of space. The interviews that I made as Alessandro Portelli, which is a very important pioneer in oral history theory, has stood on, enabled me to listen to what the interviews wanted to tell me rather than what I wanted to hear. This is primarily how it was like to live as a woman in Istanbul, beyond living as a flower seller woman in Istanbul. Actually, even more simple, what it was like to live as a woman. For this reason, I decided to set up my interviews, firstly on the statement, and at the concept of flower selling and space later. Because although I wanted to build my work on mere narrative of space, it didn't make sense without listening to the womanhood experiences of my interviewees. Had these daily life experiences not been taken into account throughout the narrative, the work could not have gone beyond the mere Beyoğlu interview. For this reason, I reinterpreted the narratives I gathered from my interviewees, from the surface to the deep. This way, oh, I'm just tired, I'm sorry. This way, my relationship with otherness and space become much more profound. Now, I want to share with you the outputs of the process. First of all, being an other as a woman. The difficulty, femininity experiences I came across within the narratives of both of my interviews shows the patriarchal pressures that they have faced throughout their lives as women. However, both women survived despite all these pressures and still continue to be challenged by these troubles. Even though I get goosebumps every time I listen to the heavy and traumatic stories, they tell me during our interviews I would like to touch one of some small anecdotes trapped between the lines in order not to see them as just the stories of oppression. Perhaps the most remarkable among them is the small spatial solidarity story of the lavender seller woman I interviewed. My interviewer, who sold lavender in front of the same shoe shop for almost 25 years, had been removed from her spot with a sudden decision by the owner. As she cannot walk too far, she starts sitting in front of the Flormar store, 10 meters behind her previous location. Although she still desires to go back to where she would like to work for years, I learned that when my interviewee was in need of money, she borrowed some from the women working in Flormar and paid them their debts when she managed to make some money afterwards. This woman working in the store, which has a history about 8 years in the street, helped more than her neighbors, with whom she had a more than 25 years acquaintance. This little network of solidarity suggests that the thing that drives people to solidarity is not only sharing the same place, but sometimes sharing the same otherness. Reading the place through its historical transformation without adding to the different social dynamics causes us to overlook and romanticize the small nuances of this manner. The store owner can displace her by using power in virtue of his property, even he has been saluting her for years and does not say anything about her staying in front of his store. Despite the fact that they are affected in a similar way by the transformation of Beyoğlu, nostalgia stumbles to gender inequality, unlike what I expected. And spatial solidarity is being established by a different dynamic, being a woman. These professions, which were taken over from other women when they are forced to due to their necessities. They felt ashamed first, but in the end, they did not stop working, which is more likely to be due to the fact that they do not have the luxury to stop working. The narration of my interviewee, who has been selling lavender for the last 25 years, was about her mother and the other lavender seller woman lined up at 15-20 meters intervals. This story still resonates in my ear. My mom also came here when she was around 70, 75. Such an arrival it was. She has gotten a lot older here. I wasn't that much of an expert on that work. It was my mom who was the master of it. For example, she was getting the root of this flower, the lavender. And they cut the branches. And here they even sold them with the branches, you know, with the whole branches. Or they would make into a bowl and sold them and so on. But yeah, I'm not as much of an expert like my mom. And I couldn't have been one, even if 30 years or so passed. Lavender, their nicknames. Age 75. I learned that the lavender's journey, not the woman, the plant, which is taken from the herbalist in those days, was started by 3 or 4 women merging and selling the lavender of the whole year cut from the fields they bought in the past. This makes me understand the value of this job even better. On the one hand, there is the urbano-capitalist mentality, which is continuously industrializing Istanbul, and that does not allow rural areas. On the other hand, there is the oblivion of this culture, as well as most of the mobile cultures, cause this woman-centered work to disappear. All these stories allow me to see this woman not only as a peddler, but also as the last representative of a very rich culture. The second one, being an other as a Romani woman. The most important reason for not wanting to include the ethnicities of these women on the main layers of this work is the history of oppression and the social exclusion of Romani identity that has been going on for years. Instead, I focused on the resistance and self-identification parts of this process and decided not to ask them about their identities, unless my interviewers want to talk about that. In similar lines, that they did not open a topic on their identities in any question that created the chance to speak on their identities. There may be different reasons for this. It is like not wanting to emphasize the identity or feeling a need for emphasizing it, or perhaps being overly focused on their own personal narrative. My aim is to try to remove the Romani stereotypes attributed to this woman over the years, instead of finding out what caused this. These are the depictions of Romani people whose attitudes towards the outsiders, gajos, has become an urban myth now. I have never received such extreme and exaggerated reactions from the 2 women I interviewed and all of their relatives I have interacted with during the interview. When we were together, I saw that they were in peace with themselves, enough to use it as a prank material when it came to the place, rather than using Romani identity as a subalternity. To be tired or bored, all of the oppressions and persecutions of society and the powers towards this identity does not mean that they have been refrained from the neighborhood where they were born and raised, and the families who brought them here. Yet, that does not turn them into the stereotypes that were produced by those who were excluded from this identity. They are in the chaos of where they live, sometimes with the help of those people with the same identity, sometimes by harm. They have been managing to stand up with their own essence for years. The best example of this relationship between one of my interviewees and an Armenian family, for whom she worked for 12 years before starting to sell lavender. My interviewee was babysat the little daughter of the family for 12 years. This family had a few shop on Istiklal Street for generations and meanwhile established a friendship with the mother. This close relationship between them often made them see my interviewee as a member of their family. Sometimes the moments of breaking the closeness lies in the internalization of economic and class differences rather than cultural ones. They would call me Iya back then. When the girl started to talk as a baby for the first time, she couldn't say Yaya, which is grandmother in Armenian, but would say Iya instead. So my name was always Iya to them. I was young, but it didn't matter. Oh, come on, Iya, come have tea with us, coffee with us. You carry on with your chat. We are okay here. I always kept myself on balance. She also really liked how I behaved. She would always say that I was a person who knew how to behave no matter what happened. I have never acted above the line. Lavender. All these stories are the reflection of a Romani woman's life that is a little familiar to all of us. The third one is being another as a flower seller Romani woman. These reflections are not considered as mere femininity or identity stories, as previously mentioned. As we wander through the layers of life, we may have suffered on the same streets and have been discarded at the same age. What I noticed in the two women I spoke with was that they were both thrown into life at a very early age and were constantly working. I have always approached them with the prejudice that they have done the same work since their childhood. But I learned that they both work in the factories in their youth and even during their childhood, and it evoked me to contact another topic that I have not came across in the sources I read before. Since they were both born and raised in the same neighborhood, I found out that one of the interviewees started working for the first time at the age of 9 and the other one at 12, while we are talking about their childhood. But especially the admiration of one of my interviewees of her work and the story that changed her entirely is also shedding light on the life of the factory worker woman of that period. I was around 22 years old, but I was such a beautiful woman, really. Beautiful woman with nice hair and pretty clothes. I have gotten myself a black skirt, nice pullover, and nice pair of shoes. We also made ourselves pretty in the train. We got on the train. You will go and won't come back, won't you? He said to me. He came with my nieces, nephews. I said, I will come back for my daughter. Then we went, coughs. While I was away, he got married with some wench from the neighborhood. She was selling also drugs. He got her for himself and then made kids from her. After me even. I was in Germany. We went together to Germany as two with my friend. We were staying in boarding houses. The boss would come look at and choose where we go, assign us to somewhere. They would look at us, to see how we look, our clothing, our faces. They assigned me to baby food factory and her to the conserve factory, the girl who came with me. We worked, and then what did I do? I went to the thing, Sunday thing. Probably she's trying to say Munich here, trying to remember the city's name. Munich. I also got myself a nice coat and boots, made myself pretty. And then also got my hair done there. Germans will be so jealous of my hair. Look here, shows the picture, daffodil, age 77. Of course, in the continuation of the story, unfortunately, she was forced to return home 7 months after her husband's repression and persuasions. The story, which lies very detailed in the memory of my interviewee, shows that this woman could live life beyond the jobs attributed to their identities, and that these moments are worth keeping in their memories also. After listening to all these stories, I cannot hide that what I've been thinking repeatedly about how it would be if she had not come back. Although she says she was taking the right decision and she did not like Germany so much, I'm sure that she asked the question somewhere in their mind. Unfortunately, my interviewee was not the only woman who has been experiencing these dilemmas. Sadly, it shows how high the chances are for these women to face with labor exploitation, and discrimination wherever they go. Whether for a flower seller or an immigrant worker, inequality and precarity is a reason and also an outcome for the feminization of labor. It continues to complicate the lives of women in many different sectors. And lastly, finally, being another as a flower seller Romani woman in Beyoğlu. Finally, when I look at the narratives of these women via space, I see the most interesting part for me. For these women have a more pristine and permanent place on space. They not only are flower sellers in Beyoğlu, but also people who were born, grew up, and aging here. Therefore, there are traces of the space, even in their disjointed or independent narratives. The most obvious indication of this is that in their childhood narratives, Istiklal Street was a playground for them. Portrayal of the street as a playground brings to mind the ludic function of the street that Lefebvre mentioned in his book, The Urban Revolution. My interviewee thinks that the unstable but safe streets that children can wander through until the morning are no longer there. I asked her, then what do you think it was that ensured there was a trust in between people? She said, I mean, it would be so hot in summers, for instance. We were in slums and all. We had a factory area, a huge factory area in front of us. That side was the factory area, and then we had our own place at the other side to play. Slums will get so warm since we would have to sleep all so close together. So in summers, my grandma would make beds outside, you know, in villages. Everyone would do the same. They would have beds in front of their doors since it was so warm. Lavender, age 75. Beyond the accuracy or misconception of this argument, the beginning and the ending of the notion of trust is a separate discussion topic. In Istanbul, where safe living areas and closed housing estates are increasing day by day, private individuals are eliminating the streets to create their own safe space. It brings to mind a reference from the same book. All the elements of urban life, which are fixed and redundant elsewhere, are free to fill the streets, and through the streets flow the centers where they meet and interact, torn from their fixed abode. This disorder is alive. The work of Jane Jacobs has shown that in the United States, the street provides the only security possible against criminal violence, theft, rape, aggression. Wherever streets disappeared, criminality increased, became organized. The best example to support this argument lies in the relationship between my interviewee and teenager drug addicts around her who inhabit her workplace. The relationship between this youngster and my interviewee, who lost her son due to the drugs, carries the authenticity and sincerity in her words, which is not occurring in the homogenized spaces. At this point on my work, to say that the solidarity of the place can have some dynamics beyond sight shows that the concept of gaze, vision, and transmission, more than what it expresses, can be very restrictive at times. In addition, the traditional, biased, and highly heteronormative methods we use to acquire spatial perceptions are also accepted without question, and we are expected to follow the already paved path. But instead of labeling ourselves as people who just an absolute observer, absolute spectator, or absolute achiever to transmit, we can comprehend that we could do this all together. Alternatively, realizing that our social economic position could be changed very quickly from dominant to passive, from hegemonic to subaltern, from majority to minority. And more precisely, when we recognized how fluid these dualities, these otherness, are, ensures adopting and contacting otherness easily. I just want to finish my presentation with the words of Amin Malouf. Isn't it a characteristic of the age we live in that is has made everyone in a way immigrant and a member of a minority? And I'm also so happy to share the narratives and the voices of these women, because they just teach me the intersectionality and they just demolished all of the prejudice of my mind. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for listening.
Another survivor here today. Thank you, Nihan, especially for sharing the narratives of Daffodil and Lavender.
We have one final presentation. It's actually a video, and let's hope I can find it. We'll hope for the best. Yeah, our last presentation is a video by Sandra Cruz.
Good morning, everyone. Greetings
Does that sound, is everybody hearing okay? Okay, I'll just.
from Dublin. My name is Sandra Cruz. Currently, I'm in the first year of the PhD program at Technological University Dublin in Ireland.
Offended? That's what I thought too. It seems like it went out of sync there. Okay, so let me just try to close it and reopen it again, and then I won't touch it.
Good morning, everyone. Greetings from Dublin. My name is Sandra Cruz. Currently, I'm in the first year of the PhD program at Technological University Dublin in Ireland. And let me share with you my screen. Yes, so here you have it. First of all, I would like to start saying that I'm delighted to participate in the first International Gender for Excellence in Research conference. I wish I were in Istanbul with you all though, but anyway, I'm here to talk about gender and collaborative learning approaches in engineering education. And my research project is under the supervision of Dr. Shannon Shantz and Dr. Brian Bowe. So the scope of this presentation is to briefly describe the ongoing research project. So this is the structure that I will follow. I will start with the problem statement as background. It will be followed by the research questions. Then I'll explain the methodology and methods planned to carry out investigation. And after that, the analysis done so far based on the literature review. Finally, some conclusions drafted from the analysis. As background, I would like to highlight aspects of the problem statement and why it is relevant to be studied. So, firstly, the underrepresentation of women in STEM has been widely recognized, and it is more evident in certain fields such as engineering. Here you can see data of 2019 for OECD countries, showing that on average, 74% of the new students in engineering are men. Also, research on this imbalance has identified a social cultural system in this male-dominated world of engineering, which somehow discourages women to engage in STEM higher education programs. We have also found out that there has been relatively little analysis of women's experiences in higher education within STEM fields. So that means that despite the numerous research efforts from a very different range of disciplines, the phenomenon is still not fully understood and the problem persists. Of course, there have been some approaches to improve the situations for women, and those involve fostering peer-to-peer and collaborative pedagogies as means to increase motivation, learning capacities, and group integration for women. However, in this context, it's pertinent to ask ourselves, how are teamwork and these collaborative learning strategies influenced by gender stereotypes and group dynamics in engineering education? And that is the main focus of the research. So let me explain you the research question. The overall research question aims to answer what challenges women face with collaborative peer-to-peer and problem-based learning while studying engineering and other STEM courses at university. And this main question is followed by three specific research questions. The first one is related to the strategies that women developed to deal with these challenges. The second one is focused on the collaborative learning strategies that are indeed effective in developing a supportive learning environment for them. And the third one aims to identify how educational programs at TU Dublin could enable a learning environment to promote diversity in STEM. With regards to methodology and methods, we thought that it was necessary to address women's lived experiences during their education in engineering, to be able to understand the gender and dynamics in teamwork and other collaborative learning strategies. So with this in mind, we need a theoretical and methodological framework useful to analyze, on the one hand, contextual factors influencing women's choice to persist in or to leave their courses, and on the other hand, insights about the socialization practices that induces feelings of identification and beliefs and belongings, etc. So in this sense, we think that phenomenology as a research method is the most convenient approach because the essence of a phenomenon is analyzed based on the perspective from those who have experienced it. So this approach will allow us to explore female students' attitudes, experiences, and beliefs during their education in engineering, and also to distill the collaborative strategies that are indeed supporting them along their studies, and those that are actually interfering with their self-confidence and the integration constructs. The research project comprises mixed methods, performing interviews, a survey, and some focus groups. So it is worth mentioning that an existing longitudinal data set of 72 interviews initiated in 2014 by the research team is already available. So in the coming months, interview transcripts will be fully analyzed to identify these benefits and challenges of the collaboration strategies. Afterwards, in the second year, it's planned to conduct a survey to extend the value and generalizability of these findings. And at the final stage of the research project, it is intended to perform some focus group of additional women studying engineering to confirm and validate the interpretation and the results. Regarding the analysis and based on the literature, we have found out some challenges of collaborative learning strategies that women face in engineering education. According to the students' experiences on teamwork, this actually might exacerbate existing social inequities in which women report to feel unheard and marginalized. So this could be explained due to the following reasons. Predominance of males. For many women students in STEM, teamwork means being the only female in the group, a fact that means that they have to adjust to a masculine culture. Feelings of intimidation. As being part of the minority group in STEM also leads to feelings of intimidation because they are part of the unrepresented group. And this condition could affect the performance in teamwork because it fosters the idea that they need to work harder to prove themselves. Unrecognized skills. So other research results also show that students from groups that are historically underrepresented might be particularly at risk since they do not feel allowed or capable to take certain roles, a fact that also can harm students' self-confidence. And examples of these are the so-called gender-based abilities for leadership or decision-making, networking, etc. And finally, struggles with cooperation in group work, that they might indeed result from student circumstances outside of a school. These include, for instance, unequal opportunity structures, negative discourses, and stereotypes that marginalize certain group of people. So, the organization of these study groups tends to depend on preconceived notions. And in such case, gender becomes a predominant factor for the initial impressions to undertake roles negotiations and tasks allocation among the group members. And what are the implications and meanings of these findings? Well, we draft some of them as conclusions. First, increasing diversity in STEM education requires understanding how students experience membership, but also how the group and classmates play a role in the formation of the sense of self-held by individuals. So here the intention is to recognize the structural issues that women face in studying engineering by analyzing their experiences during their studies. Second, the existing literature highlights the importance of studying gender-related interactions in immediate learning environments and the collaborative learning strategies used. And this is relevant because although the underlying assumption of teamwork state that women benefit from these approaches, these pedagogies also pose some challenges that reflect gender bias and that actually could be reproducing inequitable task allocation and unrecognized skills. And finally, research on collaborative learning strategies from a phenomenological approach can help us to reassess the adequacy of the strategies that could be interfering with self-confidence and belonging constructs of women in engineering and other STEM courses at university. So that is all from my side. Thank you very much for your attention. And here are my contact details in case you want to send an email for comments, questions, or feedback, or just to networking. So I wish you all the best and goodbye.
Kırmızıya.
Thank you very much. The presentations were really amazing and I learned a lot. My question, since Helen, Mariko, Valeria, and Sarah mentioned the need for some kind of interactions in different kind of industries and sectors, I'm just wondering what type of interventions can be more, useful or efficient, like top-down or bottom-up approach. Like, do you believe that such interventions or changes should be made in voluntary sense or should be regulated by the state? Or since all of you coming from different nationalities or different countries and you are experiencing different types of cultures, what makes you different in terms of thinking about the efficiency of such different approach while you're experiencing the different kind of national policies? Thank you.
Does it run? Okay. I can speak for our research. The enriching thing that I think that can run is the union of the two different kind of approach. And my one is a pedagogical one that want to be bottom up. So try to educate, to design, and to gain a consciousness about power structures and biases and problems about the topic we focused on. And so we hope that this can instill a seed. And Sarah, with her approach, which is more institutional, because she works on the corporate environment. And I think that both, in our case, both our approaches can function, and the power of this research is the network of the two approaches, because. And also,
Yeah,
also,
I can say.
sorry,
Sorry.
just one super fast thing. Also, by joining our two research, we want to try to change the perception of the designer and what they can create, because by now, working in the company section, it's like to change and to modify the way of work that it's used by now. And with Valeria research, we want to, she wants to improve from the beginning the approach that the designers has to the project. So working together, we want to try to improve what is going on now and what can be in the future.
I can say for engineering, and I'm also, which I agree, is a bottom-up theory is useful for Turkey, but it's changing huge things in Turkey. There are lots of things, and social policy and education structure, and it's hard to build in this situation for it. But for engineering, we can add compulsory lessons for engineering and technology for these departments, for professors too, I can say.
I think I won't be able to give a very simple answer to that question. I think for the fashion industry, because it's so incredibly global, the value chain is completely global. So it's kind of impossible to look at it from only a national perspective. I mean, there has been a lot of engagement from like civil organizing and people's movements and NGOs in terms of like workers' rights. And that has been big since like the 90s, but the effect of it has been really incremental in terms of like improving working conditions and wages and things like that. So I think the solution is going to have to include a lot of different elements. I think part of it is definitely going to have to be legal, because if it's on a voluntary basis, nothing will change. I think the whole industry needs to shift to become greener, and that's going to be a combination of ending the use of fossil fuels. But because it's so tied to like the logic of economic growth, I think if really the goal is sustainability, the industry is going to have to shrink. And if the industry shrinks, that's obviously going to affect workers globally. So that's going to be a big challenge of how can we make that transition a just one where workers are not left behind. So I think there's a lot of different levels of, layers of changes that need to be made. Yeah.
And if can I add one thing, I think that the approach, I'm talking for our context, but I think that this can be used in, I don't know, maybe you can answer. The approach should be more local to solve the problem, because one of the biggest problem of the design pedagogy and the design field that I face in my research is the Eurocentric view, Eurocentric approach to the field, to the problem of the field. So it is important to trying to activate a local resolution.
Hi. I have a question for Selem and I have a comment for Mariko. Selem, I found your presentation very interesting, and mainly because I have been looking at women in STEM, not in Turkey. I don't know that much about Turkey, but in Central and Eastern European countries. And what struck me is that there are some similarities between some Central and Eastern European countries like Bulgaria and Turkey. And it would be very interesting, I think, not for your current research that is focused on Turkey, but for future research to, some comparative work in the sense that these are, scare quote, high performers when compared to the kind of average European Union data that is available of women in STEM and women in engineering, and how, like you say, women in engineering, depending on what branch of engineering. But what is very interesting in Central and Eastern European countries is that you have very high or higher percentage of women in STEM and including women in engineering than in other European Union countries. And the reason is where they are in universities, they are not in industry. That is reconciliation of work and family life. Okay. And the academic work is very low paid. So you find there also in Turkey, very low paid. So what happens is that in universities, the male engineers and other scientists, they run to industry. They run the men to the higher paid. And for women, they stayed in those lower paid jobs in academia, and also they find it much easier to, as I said, to reconcile work and family life. So it would be very interesting to see, to highlight, to go more to the bottom of this issue, because I was trying to show in this research that I did is how, a percentage of women in grade A, like professors, it is taken as the main indicator of the situation of gender equality in research and innovation in Europe. And the idea is to argue, okay, it is a good indicator, but it has a lot of limitations. So we need to go beyond that. We need to go where, look at these more higher performance countries and what is happening there and where are these women and et cetera, and what kind of jobs are those academic jobs, what conditions there are there. So I think that a comparison would be very interesting in future. Because actually there are I haven't come across comparisons countries like Turkey and let's say Poland. And I think it would be very, very good. And for Mariko, I want to thank you, Mariko. Your presentation made me think. I have been very interested in this issue of co-optation. And I must confess, I don't know that much about sustainability, sustainable development, but I have been very interested for a few years back in this co-optation of feminism. Nancy Fraser has a lot about that, and many other feminist academics. But it's a co-optation of the sustainability discourse as well. And I was thinking of the relationship. For sustainability, as I said, I don't know much about it. I remember reading a very good article about the co-optation of the German Green Party. Very interesting, and I could relate with all this co-optation of feminism and feminist discourse. And it made me think, because I was thinking about the relation between, co-optation of feminist discourse, co-optation of this sustainability discourse, and how the problem with co-optation is that it's very invisible. And for instance, nowadays we think, oh yeah, feminism is environmentalism. And we don't think about co-optation, it's very hidden. And there is also a danger, I think, that this co-optation of both, in a way, what can happen is that it can lead to women disempowerment, as you said.
And all these run for sustainability as well. You know, co-opted discourse of sustainability end up in women's disempowerment. So very interesting. So this is mainly a comment. So thank you all.
Any other questions? Magic microphone. Okay, I don't go far.
Yes, it's sort of questions and comments, but I couldn't resist. It's so interesting, these processes that you took up in Turkey, where the women are leaving, are not going to the private industry because the conditions in academia seem more favorable. I think at least one of the explanations given, not the only explanation, of women in STEM in the Swedish universities is that you're such a long time in a precarious position in an academic career, or if you don't have a strong backer, you feel uncertain. But women who've done their research and PhDs in engineering can very well get a job in the private sector that is better paid and has actually known hours of work and gives you a somewhat permanent position. So if you're in your early 30s and you want to have children and take your 1 year or half a year or whatever parental leave, that you can do when you have a job in industry. You can do it at the university, but when you're in a precarious research position, you're kind of taking your foot out of the door. So it can be quite, what you're saying, quite different in different contexts when you're looking at the same kind of thing. But I also had just a really complimentary, reference for the work that you're doing on engineering. It's so very thorough, but I could send you the reference because I don't have the full run through the head of looking at bodies in an intersectional position in math and engineering by a researcher whose only the first name I remember, but I can really send it to you because it's quite good in terms of how women negotiate with their bodies to look like an engineer or a mathematician, or not to look like an engineer or mathematician, but think about their bodies and being students in that field, and this kind of desire from not their desire, from an intersectional position. And then I did have a question for Mariko on I'm going all over the place, excuse me. This is just in terms of, and the question that Mary Lou took up, is sustainability really more work for mother? And it's an old book about housework, but in terms of the recycling, there's some people, and I wanted your opinion on it because you're more of an expert in this area. There's some people who argue that we spent a lot of time recycling, which is a good thing to do, organizing the trash, trying to do changes as individuals in our individual pattern of living, our individual consumption. And it's a bit, these are good things to do. I'm not arguing against us trying to limit our own individual footprints, but some people argue that it's very much the case that these changes will be so insufficient that we should be using our energy also to change policies regulating industry. What would your comment be on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely. I think one of the arguments that I make that I maybe didn't have time to talk about is the problem with having such a big focus on consumption and household in terms of sustainability is the risk that the solutions to sustainability become depoliticized and privatized and also feminized. And I'm not the first to say this. I mean, Kat Sanderlands wrote an article in the early 90s about the environmental burden being placed on women in terms of like buying non-toxic or safe household products or baby products and how those types of products were being marketed to women. So I think it's an issue that's existed for a long time. And I think in the context that I'm looking at, it's a perpetuation of that problem where if futuristic technological solutions in combination with consumption-based solutions are being pushed to us, then that's creating a huge risk of distracting us from the real problem by making us think that we can achieve these sustainability goals through the act of buying the right things. So the question becomes what to buy instead of should we be buying things at all, right? So I think it's a distraction of a much more structural issue, and it's dangerous when that becomes privatized and depoliticized. So.
Thank you.
Last chance. Anyone? Last takers? Great, let's thank our presenters.